Greetings, Mrs. Minister, and thank you very much for agreeing to give us an interview on this program. Taiwan is actively helping Ukraine now. It is not only about humanitarian aid to the settlements affected by the aggression, but also about investments in the Ukrainian future and education. Recently, one of the Lviv's Lyceum received a variety of educational equipment from the Taiwanese Ministry of Digital Affairs, which you had, and others. How important are such investments in education in general, and what do you think the education of the future will look like?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In Taiwan, we have a saying, wherever there is school, there is hope. Indeed, schools are centers of digital resilience and national revitalization. So by equipping teachers and students with not just the equipment, but the know-how to thrive in the digital era, we are sowing the seeds for inclusive prosperity. I'm myself a junior high school dropout, but I work with all kinds of schools together to learn online, to build better tomorrow, not just for myself, but also for my community of free software and open source developers. And so because of that, I think we understand the power of education to build better tomorrows with the people. And politics should never stand in the way of real cooperation. So it's perfectly logical that during this process, schools should play a frontline role in ensuring that the people's thirst for knowledge and learning is satiated.
Продовжуючи тему освіти, я хочу поговорити про освіту майбутнє.
The last few weeks have marked our first acquaintance with the capabilities of artificial intelligence.
І вже зараз говорять, що величезна частина того, що було звичними
We see that AI is able to write textbooks, essays, compositions, and everything that was important for people is not absolutely exhaustive in terms of machine capabilities.
Здатний писати реферати за учнів, твори, все те, що раніше виглядало важливим для людських зусиль, зараз є абсолютно вичерпним з точки зору можливості
машин. What will education look like, and how can we make sure that in the future people use their own intelligence and not artificial one?
Well, before I joined the cabinet in 2016, I was a member of the Basic Education Curriculum Committee in Taiwan. And we debated long and frequently about this exact problem. And so because of this, we said that let's change the basic education curriculum. In the new curriculum, we changed literacy, which is about consumption, about memorizing, and so on, literacy into competence. So instead of digital or media literacy, we now talk about media and digital competence, because literacy is when you read or memorize, but competence is when you co-create, when you make new narratives, new products with one another. Indeed, as you said, automation in not just AI, but also search engines really have rendered almost obsolete the education system's requirement for people to memorize things. And so I think it's very important that we see the tools in education, like in Taiwan now, each and every school children have a tablet, or when they get older, notebooks in their classes, to use them not just as a consumption device, but as a co-creation device. And it's my hope that with my ministry's contributions, along with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the schools, to Lyceum, Grono, and more in the future, we can help each other to become bastions of enlightenment and preparedness for the bright post-war future for Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government is very proud of its achievement in digital technologies, primarily in its about the digital state. However, I remember well how former Estonian President Kersti Kaljulaid, when she asked about the Ukrainians' achievements in the digital sphere, she said that it's not only the form of the digital state that is important, but also its content. Indeed, we can see how in Taiwan the capabilities of the digital state are used to unite community, and in the People's Republic of China the capabilities of the digital state are used for total surveillance of citizens, which has become symbolic, for example, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomic Region. How can we make sure that the digital state helps democracy and not autocracy? This is very important for the Ukraine today.
Yeah, I've been aware of the great work from the Ukrainian civic technologies community since the Prozoro days, almost 10 years ago now. And I congratulate DIA's success, not just domestically, but now that I've learned that USAID is now helping people who want something like DIA around the world to receive support in terms of DIA technology. So a job really well done. Indeed, I think democracies use digital technologies to make the state transparent to its people, while autocracies use technologies to make the people transparent to the state. So very different directions. Last April, I signed a declaration for the future of the internet with more than 60 partners worldwide, along with the US, Ukraine, Lithuania, and more. And in the declaration, we are democracies, so with very similar ideas, we jointly pledge to promote the openness and interoperability of the internet in a pluralistic, that's to say inclusive way, and to use this multi-stakeholder governance approach, not the top-down coercive approach, to shape the internet into a resilient structure while strengthening mutual trust and the protection of freedom and human rights. So these shared values, I think, is an excellent example of borderless collaboration. And as Taiwan and Ukraine are both signatories, I think we are democratic partners bound by the deep-seated respect for freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law, and international order. So we look forward to cooperate closely on strengthening digital resilience for all democracies.
I want to talk about the experience of the information warfare. You said that Taiwan is taking over the Ukrainian way of conducting information warfare against Russia. Even prior to the war, Ukrainians' information resistance was not so very successful, perhaps also because a huge number of our citizens know Russian very well. However, Taiwan is similar to Ukraine in this regard, because all Taiwanese people understand Chinese well, so they can also be subject to the Chinese information attacks. Or are the people of Taiwan, which their vast democratic experience, less susceptible to information attacks?
Yeah, indeed. We've had a very long history fighting autocracies and authoritarian expansionism. So consistently, we put a really key priority in strengthening resilience of not just our critical infrastructure, but also our journalism, our newsmakers sector, so that we can together overcome online harms and also increase participation in democratic processes. And I think that's partly because in Taiwan, democracy is a relatively new thing. We first started the direct presidential election in 1996, so that's already after the Wide Web. So when designing our democracy, we put a lot of emphasis on not just the once every 4 year or every 2 year voting, but also on participatory budgeting, on referendums, on sandbox applications, presidential hackathon, and many continuous democracy, deliberative democracy. And the more that people participate in these forums, the more people become inoculated against the propaganda from the autocracies, because the propaganda was always about that democracy only leads to chaos and only authoritarian models can respond to societal challenges. But by practicing democracy, everybody can see that democracy can deliver.
Speaking of cyber attacks, which have become an important part of the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, do you see any real opportunities for the civilized state to protect themselves from information influence?
Yeah, indeed. I think in this regard, Taiwan and Ukraine are really in a similar situation, that's to say in the front line, and standing firm against all the attacks. Last August, a couple of weeks before Taiwan's MOD, Ministry of Digital Affairs, founded, we were subject to one of the largest denial of service attacks ever, actually 23 times in a day compared to the previous peak. So this is like a huge amount of attack. But it's not just cyber attack, but it's also in tandem with disinformation, manipulation of information to try to portray, as I mentioned, that democracy only leads to chaos. And we successfully counter against that, engaging the Web3 community using interplanetary file system or IPFS. So people from, say, Ukraine or anywhere really in the world can donate spare hard disk and spare bandwidth to help our ministries back up our website to keep the website available. And this is not unlike the help from the cryptocurrency community to Ukraine in the beginning of the war, and I think and throughout the war. So I think engaging this borderless community, enhancing the cybersecurity while developing the necessary cryptographic collaboration to allow us, for example, for me to be recognized as an e-resident of Ukraine and you vice versa. I think this is very important both economically and also cybersecurity-wise, so that we do not have to say reinvent a wheel, but can instead jointly defend against attacks on our common infrastructure.
Please tell us what's the most important thing of the development of the digital technologies in Taiwan. How did it work and what is the role of the government in it?
Наскільки серйозним є державний контроль за цим розвитком? Чи навпаки, держава робить все, щоб цього контролю не було? Як вона допомагає приватним інвестиціям і ініціативам в галузі цифрових технологій? Яким є рецепт такого успіху?
Yeah, since I was a young child, I've always known that the government of Taiwan insists that broadband is a human right. And this is important because through digital infrastructure, we reduce the cost for private sector and the social sector to come up with new technologies. Nowadays, our network infrastructure allows anyone to broadcast live from Jade Mountain, Taiwan's highest peak. So it also safeguards freedom and openness of expression. The other thing that the state does is that it recognizes and subsidizes the digital public spaces, but without governmental control. The largest Taiwanese online bulletin board system for 25 years now, the foreign PTT, which is like Reddit in the US, is entirely run within the Taiwan Academic Network. It's free software, it's governed by its participants, indeed by a student club in the National Taiwan University. So while the operation cost is subsidized by the university and therefore by the state, it is not that the state has any say in the freedom of speech or censorship or surveillance when it comes to that forum. But because it has no advertisers and no shareholders, it doesn't serve the interest of surveillance capitalism either. So it is on PTT, for example, that we, before anyone really in the world, detected early 2020, indeed a day before January 1st, 2020, that there is something going on in Wuhan from Dr. Li Wenliang, and therefore led to our early pandemic response. So a digital public space that is treated as an infrastructure, subsidized but not controlled by the state, I think is also important in addition to broadband as a human right.
Taiwan and Ukraine have something in common, that transition from a one-party monopoly to a classical democracy. How successful was Taiwan's transition to such a possibility of choice?
Я, звичайно, не збираюся навіть порівнювати той режим, який був встановлений партією Гоміньдан і генералісимусом Чан Кайши на Тайвані, і режим комуністичної партії Радянського Союзу. Однак, так чи інакше, в обох місцях громадяни не розуміли, що таке вибір і конкуренція. Наскільки вдалим, на вашу думку, був перехід Тайваню до такої можливості вибору? І наскільки можна говорити про те, що політична культура сьогодні на Тайвані пов'язана із взаємоповагою, з повагою до іншої точки зору?
Yeah, thank you. You highlighted a very important aspect of Taiwanese politics in that we're fundamentally a transcultural, a pluralistic polity. We have 20 national languages, including the sign language. Now, we recognize marriage equality, the first in Asia. And so I think the political culture here is as much as it is about party competition, it is also about finding rough consensus, good enough consensus, things that people can live with despite our really very different backgrounds. I understand that many people portray Taiwan along with other East Asian countries as a kind of homogeneous Confucius worshipping culture, but it is not like that in Taiwan. We enjoy absolute freedom in terms of religion. Both of my grandparents are Catholic, but my dad is a bit of a Taoist and so on. And so I think this is the conversation and transcultural co-creation between the different backgrounds that shapes the contemporary Taiwanese culture and therefore its politics.
How do you assess the intensification of relations between Ukraine and Taiwan last year? Can we talk about any development, and what should the mechanism of relations between our countries look like in the future?
Yeah, well, although Taiwan does not have a formal diplomatic relationship with Ukraine yet, our government wasted no time in complementing the countrywide donation drive by joining international sanctions against Russia. And so I think Taiwan and Ukraine stand shoulder to shoulder in defending democracy, and this is what bonds us together. And our latest collaboration, the Taiwan Can Help Free the Future campaign, just started, and the sky truly is the limit.
We often talk about the lessons of the Russian-Ukrainian war. What are such lessons for you?
So when the MODA was in its planning phases before the war, I think we planned MODA to be a motor of digital transformation in the commercial sector. But when the situation happened, and we've seen the unprovoked, brutal invasion from Russia to Ukraine, we immediately adapted our roadmap so that MODA, the ministry now, is about digital resilience for all. And it includes, for example, over this year and next year, 700 non-geostationary satellite receivers in Taiwan and also some abroad, some in fixed places, some in vehicles that's moving. And you probably already know this by first-hand experience, but without high bandwidth communication to the world during a time of crisis, the world would not know what's actually happening. And propaganda, disinformation, deepfake, synthetic video, and so on will probably take over the international media landscape. And so keeping communication open, I think that is the point that we have learned from your experience. And we also learned to work with multiple public cloud providers. So we engage with Microsoft Azure, Amazon, Google, like everyone. And we are also engaging with multiple satellite providers, not to put all our egg into one basket, so to speak.
Скажіть, будь ласка, в принципі, якщо говорити про
Speaking about the situation in the region where the Taiwan is located, how do you assess the level of danger? How likely is a real military conflict?
Наскільки Китай зараз є загрозою для безпеки Тайваню, і наскільки, в принципі, можна говорити про військове співробітництво демократичних країн в регіоні, таких як Японія, Південна Корея, Китайська Республіка на Тайвані тощо?
Yeah, I think just like earthquake prevention, instead of trying to predict like exactly when earthquake would occur, we need to build our buildings and plan our cities with resilience in mind. And so with this, I think this clarity does not mean escalation. So we're certainly not escalating. And it seems currently that it is not, the state of tension is not as high as last August. But with that said, we've received a lot of attention and conversations with the geopolitical allies in the Indo-Pacific regions, but also outside of the region, people who are connected by shared values in cybersecurity, in protecting freedom of speech online, overcoming online harm, and so on, outside of the Indo-Pacific region, because the way we live and work and co-create in open society now is not about neighborhood of geopolitical distance, but a neighborhood of shared values. And I think in this, we share very closely with Ukraine our values in making sure that digital sphere remains free from the expansionism of autocracies. So I think, yeah, currently the tension is not that high. We're not escalating, but we are making all preparation that's needed in case that earthquakes, natural or unnatural, destroy our submarine cables.
Ukrainian society had been trying to reach an understanding with the Russian society for quite a long time, and we can say that these attempts have not resulted in anything real. Does the dialogue between China and Taiwan helps to come on terms with each other?
Well, as you have demonstrated, I think only with a unity against authoritarian expansionism can you truly negotiate and talk as equals. And I think in Taiwan, we are now realizing this more so than ever. So, as I mentioned, strategic clarity is not escalation, and we stand ready to have conversations about, well, cultural, scientific, technological, counter-pandemic, helping on the transparency of the counter-pandemic effort, about mitigating climate crisis, and many other topics. And to me, the most personal topic I care about is protecting journalism and protecting freedom of speech, both online and also in offline gatherings. So on these topics, I believe our own experience democratizing from a more authoritarian, indeed martial law era configuration of society can provide some help, some inspiration perhaps to the reformers within authoritarian regimes.
Regarding the development of society in the digital era, what do you see as the greatest prospect, as the greatest risks?
Certainly. So the number one risk is certainly polarization. If the social media is configured as anti-social media, where it rewards, amplifies the retweets, the shares of the messages that drives people toward hatred, toward mutual disbelief, toward apathy, like not caring about democratic processes and so on, then it actually amplifies authoritarianism. On the other hand, if, as I mentioned, in the digital public spaces, we hold ourselves to account as government officials, the rough consensus co-created by people's petitions, by the deliberative democratic town halls, and so on, then the same digital spaces may be repurposed into something that is pro-social, a pro-social social media. So the danger is polarization. And to overcome the danger, we need to commit to build the digital equivalent of town halls, of public parks, of university campuses, of museums, libraries, and national parks online, so as to promote pro-social conversations that furthers democracy. This is every bit as important as the public constructions and infrastructures in other more concrete, not bit areas.
We often talk about the changing generation of voters. If you look at young Taiwanese, how different is their view of the world from that of their predecessors, and how has digital technology affected?
Well, I think intergenerational solidarity is very important. The young people who are digital natives are like ambassadors, I guess, that helps the digital immigrants, or such as me, I migrated when I was 12, to be acquainted with the digital world, which by default knows no borders. Indeed, people who are aligned value-wise, despite their time zone differences, readily identify one another and start new projects like Wikipedia and so on that breaks the previous preconceptions of what was possible for working with essentially people you have never met face-to-face across a large distance. So this wide, worldwide co-creation is native to the digital natives, and we're very happy that in Taiwan, through lifelong education, through reverse mentorship by young people to the older people in the cabinet and so on, we've been able to share the wisdom of the elderly generation with the agility of the younger generation together.
What would you say to young Ukrainians who live in a very modern world and suddenly find themselves in the midst of the archaic war, which is incredibly reminiscent for approach of our enemies to the feudal war of the past? What would you say to young people today?
I would say that your neighbors are the people who share the same values as you. And with the communication infrastructure, with the laptops, with the notebooks that Taiwan can help provide, I wish that you think beyond the immediate neighborhood, which is, as you said, captured by a feudal era war, but instead, or in addition to that, think about neighborhood in the world, in the worldwide community that really cares about what's happening in Ukraine, and your unique experience of both strength and vulnerability is of tremendous importance to the communities worldwide who would join you in co-creation for a better future together.
Thank you, Mrs. Minister, for this interview, and I wish you and the people of Taiwan great success, and thank you for your support of Ukraine.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.